So what is user story point? Story point, I mean, let's call it as a, instead of a user story point, it's basically, I'm talking about story from the point of view of agile. So it's user stories, but we call them as story points, or SPs short with. So it's a measure of the size. Again, remember, it's a measure of the size. It's not the measure of the effort. But then people do talk it in the terms of, more convenient, more practically. It's better to actually kind of, read it as effort in person days or effort in person hours, depending on the complexity or the type of the project. So irrespective of whether you're referring to a specific e-commerce web application or mobile application, you're actually talking about story point, meaning a specific size or unit of particular effort that would be required for you to complete it in a day, for example. So that could be the effort. So the scale of points agreed and set by the team. So this is actually kind of a scale. So you can actually say that it would be, it's something like a Fibonacci series again. So usually based on the benchmark of the velocity. So again, velocity, I think we touched upon this yesterday, is a measure of the productivity of the team. So how much of work could actually be done by the team or by a person in one day, for example, could be the velocity. So the same way you can have a sprint velocity, you can have an iteration velocity, you can have a release velocity. So and bear in mind that this is not absolute number. This is actually very relative. The velocity of a team is different. Within the same organization, sitting next to them, it's completely different to the other team, which is actually working on a different set of tools, or different languages, or different platforms. So how much work can they do in one day could actually be one story point, simple. So that's the kind of a rough measure. So this work, again, bear in mind, it's not always, so it's all about productivity, right? So productivity need not be meaning quite literally the development work. It's not just about coding. It's not about programmers' work. It could be the documentation work. It could be the work involved to analyze the requirements. It could be to actually kind of design the high level or the low level aspects of a module or a component or an interface. All of that could actually be called as a piece of work. So, but obviously, we're talking about development here. We're talking about technical stuff. So we're not really talking something else like painting a house. So it would translate to coding, but that need not be only the work in terms of actually coding up. You could actually be doing a lot of other things like documentation and so on and so forth, which actually is supporting coding. And then again, when estimating, what we do typically is in terms of the process that we follow with the user story points. The team, what we do is we come up with a relative, it is again a relative estimation, as we mentioned. It's not absolute. It's not something like, okay, this is what it means. So for example, 1 kilowatt of power is actually, there is that kind of 1 kilowatt hour means, it means something across the world, but it does not mean the same in the context of user story points. When we say user story point, it's 3 points, or one story point doesn't mean the same across all the teams, across all the organizations, across all the countries. So bear in mind that we are talking about relative estimation. And so what do I mean by relative estimation? That means that, for example, if you've got 1 point worth of a story, and then you've got 3 point worth of another story, it quite literally means that a 3 point story would take, if you want to develop that and complete work on that, it would take thrice the amount of work you'll actually get to spend on the 1 point worth of the story. It's as simple as that. So what does that 1 point worth mean? It could be 2 days. If it's 2 days for you, it could be like 5 days for me in my team's context. But still, if it takes 5 days for me to complete the work of a 1 point story, it should take literally 10 days for a 2 story point worth of a task. Simple. Whereas for you in your team, a story point could be taking 2 days. So which means that the 2 story point task would take literally 4 days. Simple. So that is the relative estimation in simple terms. There's nothing else. It's not complicated. So how do you arrive at that 1 story point? What does that 1 story point literally mean? Is actually dependent on the team. It really depends on how you would define that 1 story point. Is it in terms of the technology, the platform, the module, the complexity, the tool that you use, all of those other things.